This is an interview with Judith Parkas at the UC office, and it's on the 10th of November, 1994. I'm Carol Pohl from the Sociology Department and doing oral history. Okay, Judy, if you just
Hi.
tell us about what your title is now, the many hats you wear.
Sure. I'm Executive Vice President of the Union. Would it be better for me to look at you or look at the camera? I just don't know.
Probably the camera, but
Okay.
during
Yeah.
conversation you can look at it.
Certainly.
It'll look
I'm
natural.
Executive Vice President of the UC of FIT, and I have been for many years, almost since its inception, which we'll talk about perhaps as the morning goes on. I'm also a professor of biology and physical anthropology, which is the part of biology that I'm the most interested in now. And I am a director of a fairly large federal grant, project director of a grant called the Tech Prep Grant, which seeks to outreach to high school students in a very specific way and prepare them for a successful career at a technical college. So I'm doing that now. For a very long time, my job at FIT was to help the president with curriculum development, and I think in some ways that's been one of my very big interests. Since I've always been involved in the union, I've been doing curriculum development. I've really basically seen the school grow from several vantage points, and it's been a nice integration of jobs, I think, and I've enjoyed it. So today, Carol has mentioned that the best thing for us, or the thing that this oral history is attempting to do, is to perhaps find out a little bit about the background of the union and to correlate its growth with FIT's growth, perhaps. And I would love to be able to be part of that, and I'm going to talk with you a little bit about that this morning. Early on, when teachers were, I'm talking now about 1965, 1966, when teachers across the country were starting to unionize, several people here at FIT, and I was among them, but I wasn't necessarily the absolute instigator. There were people, Irene Berger, Paul Berger, Rick Sacco. There were people, I guess really in the generation before me, who got this idea to unionize. I ended up being the first chapter chairperson, so I was the first chapter chairperson of the union when we received collective bargaining, and that was interesting. But I have to say that I wasn't the person that got the idea. I think I did help them execute it and implement it, but there was this churning to do something like this. I would say it was about the end of 1965. At the time, I had been at FIT for 5 years, and I remember that very clearly because FIT had on its board of trustees at the time two people who were very active in unions. One was a man by the name of Morris Yushevitz, who came from kind of the printers union. It wasn't called the printers union. Typography and something, there's a better name for it. And then of course we had Stolberg from the ILG, Louis Stolberg. So we assumed that the Board of Trustees would be extremely sympathetic to the faculty's desire to unionize. And in fact, perhaps in some ways they were, but overtly they didn't act that way. They gave us the same kind of opposition that boards of trustees often do when employees want to unionize. They weren't, in fact, at least overtly, as I said, more sympathetic than our colleagues' counterparts, our colleagues' boards of trustees in other schools. I remember very clearly, actually, when we had all the little cards that we had signed. I remember visiting Stolberg at the ILGWU, which you know is
Explain what that means.
The International Ladies Garment Workers Union, which is a very, very big and powerful union. And to have them on the board of trustees of a college was, in fact, seen as a real asset for us, we thought. But I remember going to Stolberg and him saying at the time, I said, that it will be a tremendous morale booster for the faculty if this collective bargaining goes through. And he said, if the union movement is very supportive of this collective bargaining attempt, meaning the Central Labor Council, the state AFL-CIO, in other words, if I receive pressure from them, I will support your petition, but I'm not interested in faculty morale. That's just what he said. So even unions where I think even where there are common purposes, and certainly unionizing in general all people should be supportive of each other, but all of us as human beings have various pulls and various pressures. And he was saying that when he's at FIT, he's on the board of trustees, he's not really a union person. And he won't be pressured to act like a union person unless the pressure is great enough. If the pressure is great enough, then he will do it. And I guess ultimately there was pressure, because we ended up becoming the collective bargaining agent. We have a document that we're in the process of framing now, which it tells us the date that it actually went in front of the Board of Trustees. It was early in 1967. And then the first contract was negotiated. It was just for faculty and full-time faculty. And I was not on that first negotiating committee because I think by that time I was out on maternity leave. And I came back at the end of, I guess I came back at the beginning of '69, and then I have been very active since then. I was out for that first contract. First contract was full-time faculty. We ultimately, and I'm sure Lou Stoller has talked to you about this, we ultimately added part-time faculty and staff, so that now we're sort of called a wall-to-wall unit. That's what the union is called, where most of the employees are part of the bargaining unit. That's unusual. One of the uniquenesses of FIT's union is that we have classified staff with us. It is unique in higher education contracts across the country. We use the word unique about FIT a lot, and sometimes I think it's more justified than others. In this case, the real meaning of the word is being used. We are the only college that has all its employees in our unit, with the exception, I think, of the custodial staff. They have their own union. But we have our staff, we have all our technicians, we have full-timers and part-timers, of course, all the faculty. So it's really quite a comprehensive group.
Why did that happen? What was the thinking behind it?
Well, we were aware that three things. I think there were three things that made us decide to try to cover all of our employees within the same local and even ultimately in the same contract, which is part of why we have this somewhat complex document as a contract. It's longer, with more clauses and more little asterisks than many contracts, but it's because we have such a big group. These were the three reasons. We were aware that after the full-time faculty organized, that the staff would want to organize. People almost from the very beginning were talking about that. It became apparent. It wasn't in any surreptitious way. It was kind of out front. So that was the first. And our staff is not civil service. Our staff is hired FIT, not off of a list. Many other colleges, especially public sector colleges, have a form of civil service they hire off the civil service list for their classified staff. So we started out with a little more flexibility. It would be very hard for the city university, for example, to organize their staff who aren't really technically belonging only to them. It's off a civil service list. So we had that reason. The second reason is that we were aware that adjuncts throughout the country in certain places were organizing, and where they were not in the same local, they very, very often organized on their own and were often in separate locals and sometimes with separate affiliates. They weren't even in the AFT. The part-timers would be in the NEA, the full-timers would be in the AFT, or vice versa. And instead of the groups of organized employees working together, they were often working against each other because they were in different locals. So those reasons compelled us to endeavor to have everybody in the same group. And it wasn't easy. I would say that was one of our early battles. It wasn't I wouldn't say it was a very, very hard one. But those of us who wanted the whole group in really needed to convince others. There were full-time faculty who didn't want adjuncts in the local. There were lots of faculty, both adjuncts and full-time, who didn't want staff. They saw it as, and I think almost anyone could probably project into why there was some opposition. Perhaps a little bit less academic and high. There were elitism reasons, just plain and simple that the staff maybe didn't have the academic degrees and the same concerns. The adjunct full-time conflicts, they weren't extreme, but they were there, are some of the ones that still exist today. And part of the reason that we've, I think, alleviated them to some extent and prevented them from becoming huge is because they've been in the same local. Certainly, for example, in terms of overload, some full-timers and adjuncts are competing for the same courses. There are all kinds of reasons why. I think some adjuncts want these full-time jobs, as well they should. Not all, but some. So I think we've been very wise and a little lucky, and some of our foresight really paid off in this regard, because one of the reasons that we've been so successful as a union is because we've had the support of all of our members, staff, and all the technologist groups, and full-time faculty and adjuncts, and now we have a considerable number of part-time staff. So these are really, in a sense, 4 groups or 5 actually, that we're representing, and all in the same contract. And it's been quite a road that we've traveled down, trying to represent all these people's interests, knowing that occasionally their interests will overlap and occasionally be in opposition. So it's worked. Yeah.
How long have you been at FIT?
I started at FIT in 1960. I was part-time for 6 months. I was still teaching at a New York City high school, and I was teaching here for part-time from February 1960 until June 1960. I was part-time, and then in September of 1960, I came on full-time. So I've been here from 1960. Now we're talking about the end of 94, so it'll be almost 30. It will be 35 years, and I was out for 1 year on maternity leave. So otherwise, I've been here.
Could we go back to the early stages of FIT? If you could describe what you remember of the thinking of the development of FIT, what it was like,
Sure.
the role of industry, unions.
I think one of the things about FIT that has been consistent, and I think that the union helped strengthen it, but did not establish it, has been FIT's mission to prepare people. It used to be young people. We always talked about young people. Now we're talking about, in many cases, all people, because we have returning adults. We have more adults coming back to school, though we still, more than many colleges, have young people in our day school. But our mission has been clearly accepted by the faculty and the staff, and I think the Board of Trustees and the students and the community even, which is, and it happens in 1994 to be a very, very, very important mission, which is to prepare young people for successful careers. Certainly, we would like for them to be well-rounded, and I do believe that the liberal arts parts of our school get respect and have some emphasis, but the mission has been very clearly what's now called school to work. We have had it at FIT way before other colleges really accepted it as a valid mission. We've always said we need to prepare people for careers, not just jobs, for careers, and we need to give them the skills in a myriad number of ways that will allow them to work successfully. The thing about FIT, of course, is that it's been in very specific careers. We aren't just generally preparing students for work, we're preparing them for work in, nowadays it may be about 18 or 20 different majors, but it's some allied to the fashion industry career that we're preparing students for. And I think that's been true from its very inception through till now. We've been very consistent about our mission. And I think the union not only bought into that, but I think we supported it. So that's one part of it. However, when FIT started, it was the idea of 2 or 3 people. It really was the idea of 2 or 3 people who wanted workers for their industry, and it was primarily coats and suits. And so it was what we now call the manufacturing management major and the fashion design major. Those were the early ones. It quickly broadened to textiles and to fashion buying and merchandising, but the original school was the idea of a few people, and there was a kind of a proprietary interest that these pioneers had in the school. So it gave it a unique tie to industry, but it didn't bring with it this traditional higher education academic atmosphere. So FIT didn't automatically have what Hunter College had, what Yale, what Brown University would have, what the University of Illinois, what all traditional higher education schools had. FIT didn't have in its bones. The people who led it from the early days on were not academicians. And I think some of the kinds of faculty empowerment issues which were automatic on other colleges, the union really helped bring to FIT. When I came to FIT, chair people were appointed. They were the only ones that could become full professors. Scholarship certainly was revered, but it didn't play a role in promotion. It didn't seem to matter if one was doing high-level academic work or putting in lots of time at the college, or getting a doctorate or writing a book, or all the things that there was a kind of what had happened, I think, is that the model that was used to shape FIT in its very early years, from 1945, let's say, to 1960, those 15 years, was almost partly an industrial model of maybe even with a little stamp of the apparel industry. And the chairperson was like the owner, and sort of made all the decisions and decided who got promoted and who got hired and who received classes and how classes were given out, and even what courses were given to a great extent. And I'm not exaggerating it for poetic license. It was really to a great extent true. The union, I think, accepted the mission of the college, never fought the mission, but began to help bring to this college the traditional atmosphere that most higher education unions had, which was a big tradition of academic freedom, of faculty empowerment for hiring, for voting on tenure, for voting on reappointment, for shaping programs we were involved in making sure that the faculty association, which is our version of a senate really, it's the that our faculty association was legitimized to the point where there could be a college-wide T&P committee, a college-wide curriculum committee, college-wide committee to evaluate administrative personnel, all the kinds of things that are mentioned in our contract. In our contract, we don't tell these committees how to work, but we make sure that these committees exist by mentioning them in a legal document. The contract is owned by the union and the administration together, and when something is mentioned in that contract, it then becomes a document that can be enforced by an arbitrator. So it becomes, anything that's in that contract really becomes legitimized. And I think what we did in that contract, even the early ones, and we'll talk a little bit about the evolution of the contract and what kinds of things really, but even in those early contracts, besides salaries, we immediately realized that what a union can do for a school is to give strength to faculty governance and to staff rights too. It isn't just faculty governance. As I said at the early part of this interview, we are really trying as hard as we can to represent all of our members, so that the staff here at FIT, I think, are more involved in creating the atmosphere that affects how their jobs are done on a daily basis. And I think the union contract has done a lot of that. It certainly did it for the faculty. There's no doubt about it. My view is that even with an enlightened administration, and I think many of the administrations I've been through at FIT have been enlightened and have been supportive and have cared. But I think without this union contract, all of this phenomenal energy that you feel at FIT that goes into the faculty participating in how the school, the faculty, the staff, and the technical support people, the energy that you feel clearly, I mean, it's palpable, it seems to me. That energy that goes into to running this school, it has been channeled and harnessed by the union contract saying it's your job to help run the school. Your part of your job, aside from just maybe working in the computer lab or fixing the sewing machines or teaching biology or teaching sociology or getting in a critic to help your fashion design students have high level critiques. Beside that job, your job is to help run this school. You have to get elected to committees, you have to vote on who is hired in your department, you have things you must do that help run the school, and I think the union is the reason why everyone feels that way.
Do you want to discuss the contract? You mentioned how the contract has changed since it
Well,
was
yes, I would say that the contract has changed tremendously, though not ever in concept, but in comprehensiveness and in detail. We started out with fairly short clauses about how courses are given out. We call it assignment of program clauses. We call it AOP clauses, but they were short, and they just talked about seniority where possible shall prevail. And now we have a fairly complex, but I think not overwhelmingly difficult, and I don't think arcane, though I think some people think maybe I am too used to it. We have a fairly comprehensive list of clauses that talk about how courses are given out. We've broadened it so that we talk about the day session classes. Then we have to talk about continuing ed classes. We have to talk about how part-timers get classes, or how adjuncts are assigned classes, and how full-timers are assigned classes, and how full-timers who teach overload are assigned classes, and how retirees who come back and teach as adjuncts are assigned classes. And we have to talk about whether chair people have some discretionary room so that they can perhaps bring in new people who aren't on these lists. We talk about when you get on the list and how many hours you have to be here before you get on the list. So the contract has maybe 4 or 5 pages on assignment of program, when in the early contract we probably had 1 page. So there, we've broadened the grievance thing. We used to talk about there shall be a grievance procedure, starts at the complaint stage, step 1, step 2. Now we've broadened that to talk about when people can file grievances on their own, when they can't file grievances on their own, when the grievance committee comes into it, what the difference is between a complaint and a grievance, arbitration, who can go to arbitration, when the union can be present at a hearing, when the union when the union has the right to intervene in one way or another. We've broadened and made more comprehensive that whole part of the contract. We've broadened and made much more comprehensive the parts of the contract that talk about vacation days and how to give out vacation time, especially for staff and for non-classroom faculty. That's, by the way, I think a worthwhile parenthesis to go off on for a minute. I've been talking all along about faculty. There's faculty, part-time faculty, and I think one of the things that the union contract has done is to integrate all of our faculty so that to the point where someone like me, who's been here a long time, will talk about faculty in a big inclusive way. Many college campuses have what we call non-classroom faculty, as they call them even non-teaching professionals. They don't even call them faculty. So that all the people that I've been including along with classroom teachers, registrars, admissions people, counselors, librarians, financial aid people, student activities people, all of those, certainly placement of all of those people, we assume are faculty. With us, they're right in there with faculty. They have a slightly different work week, but they're faculty with academic titles and all the protection of faculty. And that's another thing that I think the contract has done, and done very well, and I think has helped the school feel unified to some extent. All of us are in the union, and all of us are faculty members, and all of us have the protection of the contract, and it's been, I think it's part of the reason that again, that you'll feel a fairly high degree of investment on the part of the people who work here in the future of the college. I think the union contract has done that to a great extent, has helped the college feel this way. I don't think the administration even would disagree with my view of that, though the administration might feel, and there's probably no doubt about that, many of them have said it, that the union is more involved in the running of the college than they would like a union to be. I think that's true. And from my point of view, it's been almost completely for the good. Maybe we've brought a little tiny bit of almost what one would call a bureaucracy to some department meetings, because we talk so much about how the process of reappointment must go, how these tenure votes must go, who can vote, who can't vote. The person has to be brought in, and they have to be able to rebut observations, or they have to be present for some of the dialogue that takes place. That stuff does occasionally become burdensome, but I think the trade-off would be 1 or 2 people making these decisions. The trade-off would be much less due process. The trade-off would be much less involvement in the school. So, from my point of view, this little bit of kind of bureaucracy process that we've imposed on the college is worth it from every point of view. I'm not convinced everyone agrees with me, but I really feel strongly that it's worth it. I think the administration probably wonders sometimes, especially new administrators who come on, and we've had a goodly number of those lately. I think some of them who may even be a little bit pro-union in their head from some other industry. Oh yeah, they love the mine workers, or they love the steel workers, or oh yes. I think when they come here, they're a little taken aback at the involvement of the union in the day-to-day workings of the college. But I think in the long haul, most of them agree, once they've been here for a while, that the union's involvement has been far more positive than negative. There is no doubt that occasionally there are a few, some administrators who would probably love us to have much less influence. And I accept that. I'm sorry about it because I think they're wrong and short-sighted, but I accept that. And but those of us who've been leading the union are not influenced by that view. We feel, I mean, there are times where I almost see myself as the loyal opposition in England, you know, the loyal opposition party, and I wouldn't, I'm wondering what's going to be happening here in the United States now. And that's fine. I like that role. I think it's fine. I think it helps the country, and I think it helps the college. But mostly, we've been not even the loyal opposition. We've been in many cases the administration and union have been a collaborative effort. We've been a partnership in problem solving, I would say. Though we still do negotiate contracts, and every 2 or 3 years when we have formal negotiations, there is no doubt about it, some adversarial stuff that is set up. There is no way for us to avoid that. We're very lucky. We've had the same chief negotiator, by and large, Lou Stoller, negotiating all our contracts since 1967. And occasionally we call people in from our state affiliate to sit with us, or occasionally we'll have someone in from, mainly it's been the state affiliate, I think. But which is NYSUT, New York State United Teachers. It's the state affiliate that the UFT is in, our local is in, the City University local is in. That's NYSUT. And most of the teachers who are in the AFT in New York State all the teachers who are in the AFT in New York State are part of the state affiliate, NYSUT. But Lou has done all the negotiating, Lou Stoller, and he's a professor of psychology and has been here even longer than I have, probably the only one. I think he started in 1958, 57 perhaps. And he's a skilled negotiator. He's extremely skilled and extremely capable, and has been the president of the union for many years. I was the chapter chairperson when we got collective bargaining, but he became the chapter chairperson after that, and then eventually we spun off and formed our own local, so we changed the head's name from chairperson to president. So he's been the president lo these many years, and he's extremely skilled. We've been very fortunate. But I think that that more than these negotiations, which are pivotal, is in general the fact that the union has worked very, very hard and has had leaders that have done more than just be union. Lou is active in the social science department. Lou does many things for the college beside his union stuff. I certainly have too, had many titles. We have a whole group of officers, Juliet and Arthur and Judy Wood, and a whole group of people who do things beside the union leadership. And so therefore we're integrated into the fabric of the college in a multitude of ways, and I think that helps the union too. There's no doubt about the fact, I think I started out our interview with my saying that, for example, because I did do this curriculum development for many years and sat as the president's designee on our curriculum committee, that and was the executive vice president of the union at the same time, I think that kind of dual involvement integrates both functions just automatically. Even if you don't make an effort to do that, it happens. And there's nothing, I think, more important for a college than developing new programs and developing more curriculum and empowering the faculty and the staff to govern. So I really feel very lucky that I've been doing both of those things. I feel fortunate. I think one of the things about FIT is that the working conditions by and large are good here for people. Not always and not 100%, but salaries are more than fair given the numbers throughout the country. I think that the teaching load is fair, it's equitable. It is true that there are colleges that have a lower teaching load, but not colleges that are that started out as community colleges in the state university. No one has a lower teaching load than we do. And I think that I think the working conditions for all of our people are good, and I think the union can be credited for doing that, and I think that is part of why we have very low turnover. When people come to FIT and eventually get tenure, or CCEs, which is the kind of equivalent of tenure for part-timers, they stay. And part of the reason, and of course a few don't, a few get better job offers, or a few people decide they don't want to be in higher education, or a few people get industry offers or whatever. But by and large people stay. We have low turnover, and I think part of that is really the working conditions here. The atmosphere and the working conditions, the fact that they're decent vacation and decent pay and a way to express oneself and a way to get involved, a way to feel that you have some influence over your life. I mean, that is what makes people feel invested, I think. So, and I do credit the union with that. Not entirely, of course. We did have a president here for 21 years whose name was Marvin Feldman. He died last year, almost 2 years now. And he was instrumental, I think, also in making this climate be a positive one. But there's no doubt about the fact that if you look at the whole history of collective bargaining here at FIT, the union would be one of the reasons that that FIT has turned out to be shaped the way it is now. I really do think that.
Can we go back to you mentioned the early founders, three people. Do you know the names? Do you remember the names of
The founders of the college or the union?
The college.
The college?
The industry people, you said.
Well, the very, very early people was the first president, which we can look up, and his name was, I can't think of his name, and he was the most important one. So the most important one I'm not thinking of, but we will think of it. He was actually the first president too. It was a little teeny weeny thing, but it was the first president. And the other people were Morris Haft and Samuel Deach, and if you look now, the Haft Auditorium is named after him. There's an auditorium in the C building on the second floor. Samuel Deach was around for a long time. He may have been involved in the early years, but he was still here in the 60s when I got here. So was Morris Haft. And the other man whose name escapes me, but who was actually the first president. He was involved in it. And then, of course, Shirley Goodman was involved in the early days.
These people were coats and suits?
They were both, yes, Samuel Deach and Morris Haft were both coats and suits. They were. And they were manufacturers, and they did several things. After the war, I don't have to tell you because you know better than I, that the late 40s, there were tremendous boom times in this country. Probably we can date almost the suburbs back to that era. We had the GI Bill. Everyone was going to school. People were coming out of the service. There was a building boom. I know from my field that was when we began to talk about DNA and RNA, and all the labs were booming. This was and they needed workers, and they didn't have workers in the garment industry at the sophisticated level that coats and suits needed, and sample hands in the women's wear dress industry especially. And there was the GI Bill. They could get people to go to accredited schools and get paid for it if they just had an accredited school. So I'm sure that there are people who probably know the details better than I, but in some kind of collective way, this man whose name keeps escaping me, who was that first president, and whoever ever looks at this tape will think I had some kind of lapse here. But anyway, he and Haft and Deitch and one or two colleagues of theirs and Shirley Goodman got together to really, quote unquote, make a college that would supply high level workers to parts of the fashion industry. And the charter for the college actually is owned by the Educational Foundation. They received a charter from the state to start a college, and they still technically have the charter. I think it was after its early founding, we ultimately actually became a part of the state university, because the state university was just starting then too. I know because my husband came out of the service in '46, and he went to a little college that was just for veterans, which has ultimately become part of the state university now. They were just starting. It was Rockefeller really who pushed the state university. So FIT started in a sense when the state university started, and there were a lot of little stumbly steps along the way. But it was Haft and Deitch and that other very important person, and Shirley.
And could you talk a little about Shirley Goodman?
Oh, sure. Shirley Goodman was an interesting, really fascinating lady. She came from the southern part of the United States, and her son is a faculty member here, and he certainly knows a lot more about her background. Her son is, his name is Alan Fishman, and he works in the Fine Arts Department. And he certainly would be an interesting person for this project, because he played here when he was a little tiny kid. She came to the United States, and she became active in New York City as a worker. I'm not positive that she wasn't one of these real self-made people. What I'm saying is I'm not even positive that she had a college degree. Here she was instrumental in forming a college. She played the piano beautifully. She was very well read. But in those days, you could really be somewhat scholarly and somewhat intellectual and not have gone to college, And she was one of those people. I think it didn't help that she was a woman. I'm sure that with her background, had she been a man, she might have gone to college. And she actually ended up being the secretary to a man who was very, very active in New York politics, whose name was Grover Whalen. And she was active, and she worked there, and she also had contacts in the fashion industry. So a combination of her political contacts with Grover Whalen and the city people, and her fashion industry contacts, led her to help these industry people who wanted to start a college, led her to help them do it. So she really was instrumental in starting the school. She helped them write to the right agencies, to talk to the correct people they may have been able to garner some money and some influence from the fashion industry. But when one needs to start a college, you need more than that. You need to talk to the city council people, to the mayor's office, to the people in Albany who were involved with the state ed department. If not state university yet, there has been a state ed department for 100 years. So she coordinated some of those efforts, and she shepherded this school through from its inception practically until her death. She was the executive director of that educational foundation for years and years. That was this group that, as I said, really holds the charter to the college in the early days, and does some fundraising for and is becoming even more active in fundraising for our scholarship fund and for special projects that the college is not allowed to fund on its own because it's a public sector college. A lot of the research projects that we have with industry where we take on where we sign a contract with a group to do research into uniforms, or some of the foreign contacts that we have, overseas contacts. The Educational Foundation signs those contracts because I think I'm not positive, but I think the college is not actually allowed to do that. So the Educational Foundation signs the contracts for some of these research projects and for some of these overseas based campuses that we have. Not campuses so much, but connections.
How does the foundation differ from the Board of Trustees?
Oh yeah, the Board of Trustees is a similar Board of Trustees to many community colleges that are under the auspices of SUNY. We have, I think, 3 appointees by the governor, 3 appointees by the mayor, which is our local sponsor, the city, or 3 appointees from the New York City Board of Ed. In other words, we have a 9-member board with 9-year appointments, and that's true for all the other community colleges under the auspices of the state university. They have their own boards of trustees, and they are appointed in a similar way to ours. Though we have, because of our specialized nature, somewhere in the legislation it says people from the industry should be on the board. But the Educational Foundation is a semi-private foundation that has been set up to be allowed to raise money and to do special projects for the school, and they do not do the traditional things that the Board of Trustees do. The Boards of Trustees pass on our budget. They do all the things that any college Board of Trustees does. This Educational Foundation is a separate group. It has its own it has its own executive director, and it has a considerable, well, I mean, I don't know, I guess compared to some other school, to Yale, or to Berkeley or whatever. I'm not sure about Berkeley, actually they're public sector, but private schools, our Educational Foundation compared to these other schools may not have a lot of money, but it has some money that it can almost use as an endowment to fund special projects. And that is not public money. That's money that's been privately raised.
You mentioned these manufacturers. Just in terms of their backgrounds, these were not college people, I assume. But the immigrant, it sounds like
Most
they
of
were
them were
Eastern European Jewish immigrants.
Right.
That's what it sounds like.
Yes, they were.
That started the businesses, and they made
Exactly.
manufacturing.
Right. It is.
Yeah.
It's true. And all of them were, and some of them still are here. I would say that the original Jonathan Logan guy, that David Schwartz was like that. Abe Schrader is still on our board. He's exactly that type. He's now quite elderly. I mean, I'm not I certainly shouldn't be, but I'm sure he's in his upper 80s. He is one of those. He is exactly that vintage. These men, and there were some women, but it was mainly men, who came from Eastern Europe and who were involved, like those moguls from the movie industry. It's the same kind of moguls from the apparel industry. They were here. They were doing very well. They had a desire. They had a real respect for education but a real love of their own industry, and they acted on this desire to, number one, do something for the industry that had been good to them, and also to get involved in this field that they found so inspiring and that they were in awe of, which was education. And a combination, I think, of all of those motivations led them to really get involved in the school, and they worked very, very hard. When I came to FIT, Deitch was still around and Haft was still around, and we had this other man, David Zelinka, maybe a drop less European, but also that vintage, who was chairman of the board. Those were the people who started the school. They started it, and in the early days, David Dubinsky, who may have worked for the ILGWU, but was also that vintage, this Eastern European immigrant man, was also fairly helpful in the starting of the school. I don't know the details about how he helped, but I know that that if you look at our timeline in the early days of FIT's existence, I'm talking about the 40s and the 50s. David Dubinsky's around. He's in the pictures. His name is on one of our buildings, so he too helped. These manufacturers, were and women's wear company executives. They were, most of them did manufacture, but one or two of them were sort of from the design end. They have to this day a real sense that FIT is their institution, that that this is their school. And even though we've grown considerably and we have majors where you really have to stretch the definition of fashion to call it fashion, interior design, which is really very allied to architecture, though but especially since we give bachelor's degrees now. But interior design and some of our other majors, they do stretch the definition of fashion, and some of those majors are doing very, very well. Toy design, restoration, those are we've really taken fashion to its ultimate when we call it, but it's still the fashion industry's college in their mind. When you do spend time in industry and you tell people that you teach at FIT, up and down on 7th Avenue, all of them say, "Oh, FIT, my cousin, my uncle, my blah," they're all, and they have, even if they haven't had family members who go there, it's a school that they feel comfortable with, that people in their firm could even teach at part-time as an adjunct. We get people in from the industry to teach here. So I would say that connection, which may have been stronger in the early days, is still very much alive.
Of the students, what were the students like in those early days? I mean, you seem to indicate that they may or may not have been the children of these people in
Right.
the industries.
Yeah.
Who were they? They were kids coming from...
I would say that they were, in the vast majority of cases, they were students who were the first ones in their family to go to college. Didn't matter what ethnic or racial background, that varied tremendously. But I can talk about that a little, because as a sociologist, you'd be interested in that. It's probably changed a little bit, maybe more than a little bit. But the thing they have in common, and they still have that to a great extent, students whose families were not college graduates, and they're the first ones going to college. I think that they're very often kids that are a little bit artistic, they have this high school, maybe one or two art classes, they did very, very well, or they took one or two business-oriented classes and did very, very well, or decently in those, and they've heard of FIT. It has a slightly glamorous reputation, and their high school counselor says to them, it is part of the state university, you can go there, and they even do have dorms, and I think in the early days when we didn't have the dorms, actually, most of the students commuted, but they still fit that type. They still were students. There are exceptions, and I'll talk about the exceptions in a minute. There are exceptions, but I think it was clearly a tremendous step in this upward mobility picture that one reads about. Students came here whose families had not gone to college, and this was a place where they would go to college, but they could say to mommy and daddy, or mommy and daddy could say when they get out they'll be able to get a job. I know for sure they'll be able to get a job, and I think that's fine. We do have a large number of students who come here after they've had a bachelor's degree, very often from a fairly rigorous and impressive institution, but who either discover that they really are interested in some aspect of the fashion industry, maybe textile designing or sales, who come here for our 1-year program. So our 1-year program where they don't need to, they don't need to take the liberal arts. They've had them somewhere else. They take all very, very concentrated courses in one area, and they get a degree after 1 year. Those programs very, very often pull in a different profile, students with a different profile than our other programs, and those have been in existence since the 60s. We didn't start out with that 1-year program. We started out with a 2-year AAS degree program. Students came for 2 years, got an AAS degree, and went out. And it was patterned to have about 1/3 of it be liberal arts, theoretically 1/3 of it to be your major, and 1/3 of it be courses that were related to your major. That's how we started out. We've made some modifications in that, but many of the AAS degree programs still look like that to a great extent. As you know, we then added the 1-year program where you just take courses in your major with a few relateds. And then we eventually got our upper division so that students can come here and stay for either for a BS or a BFA. And now we even have some selected master's degree programs. So we really have, and that's the kind of stuff that I think I was involved with in let's say mainly the 70s and the 80s. Those 20 years, I was working with a lot of program development. It was very exciting.
And the thinking is they get an associate, they have to apply again
Yeah.
to the upper division.
Yeah, they apply again, and I think the thinking was that in order, first of all, we wanted it to be a semi-honors program. We wanted the better students, the students who like the academic process. They may love their field, but they like the academic process to stay. That was our early thinking. The other ones, since we were preparing them for work, could get good jobs, and we were proud of that. We thought the students who were comfortable with the academic process found once they got here that they liked going to school, they liked being in classes, they liked having formal instruction. Why shouldn't they be able to stay and get a bachelor's degree? That was one thing. The second thing was that they weren't happy with us petitioning for this bachelor's degree, and part of the way in which we got it through the state university and the state ed was to say to them, this is almost like an internal honors program. We'll be recruiting from among our own students. We won't be competing with Pratt and Parsons and SVA and even Purchase and other units of the state university. Now, those restrictions have eased a great deal. I think the state university is proud of FIT, glad that we're doing what we're doing, and I think they're not as restrictive. And now we do recruit by telling students that there is this upper division program. We still ask them to apply, reapply, but there is an expectation that if they've done fairly well, that they can stay on.
It's not in every major though.
No, it is not in every major. Jewelry, for example, doesn't have an upper division. Many programs don't have an upper division, but some of those, but every AAS program has a way for students to get a bachelor's. It may not be what we call a vertical program. They might not stay in the same field they studied as the AAS degree, but if a student really wants to stay on and get a bachelor's, he or she might have to change his or her focus, but there would be a spot for him to get or her to get a bachelor's.
Since you were involved in this, for example, in the fine arts, I don't think they have a upper division program. What is the thinking behind that?
Well, the thinking for the fine arts actually was that we were bending our mission a drop with even their lower division program, because the fine arts is kind of seen as a little bit more of a general liberal art, and to have a major in fine arts which was not connected to a specific industry, where students could just go out and get jobs and get internships and get placed, was really stretching. I'm very proud of the Fine Arts Department. I think they do a wonderful job, but actually that is probably the lower division major that is the least like all the others in terms of having a very specific industry that says we want your workers. And that's part of why those of us who have been involved with this academic curriculum committee type of thing, we've all said that the fine arts department, though there should be, if students really would like to be introduced to a vast array of media, so that they can take oils and they can take acrylics and they can take drawing and they can take 3D stuff, sculpture, they should be, and if that's what they want to do, they should be allowed to major in that. Definitely. We should keep it small, because they're going to have to freelance. That will not prepare them for real absolute jobs. But if that's what they want to do, they really want to be in the studio, they'd like to be artists, they should be encouraged to stay as majors. But the other thing that the fine arts department should do is provide what we call foundation courses for the other art and design oriented majors. So if students are going to be textile designers or fashion designers or illustrators or advertising designers, all the art-oriented majors, they should take a couple of fine arts courses so they're just introduced to basic drawing, basic design, and the media, so that they're comfortable with doing acrylics and oils and watercolors and whatever, and then go on and take. Now, we don't have enough room in our curriculum for them to take a lot of fine arts courses, and this has been a constant problem. These other majors want to get their kids fast into the like guts of illustration, and the real maelstrom of advertising design, and they resist wasting these precious hours on fine arts, but it's a mistake, I think. I think they should be taking some fine arts as a foundation. There's a constant problem at FIT, which I think is okay, but I think it may be a little exaggerated. A constant problem of finding room in the curriculum for what is current. Because what happens with educators, and I think this is true in medical school, I think it's true in law school, what happens is that everybody wants to teach what's current, but they don't want to drop out what's dated. So they keep adding more and more. So how can I send my students out to industry without this special new, now we're not doing airbrush anymore, we're doing blah blah computer something. But are they dropping out what they were teaching 25 years ago? No. They're still teaching that, plus they want the new stuff. There's no room, and this is true. This is a continual problem at every school where you're teaching skills for an industry. Even medical school. There's no doubt about it. So more and more crowded. Now it's, and that's a big problem. It is a big problem. And this is not union-oriented. I would say the union has not been involved in this at all, but this is a big curriculum problem that always has people tussling with each other a bit, maybe as it should be. But it does cause from time to time some individual problems.
Could you explain a little more about how the students have changed? They've stayed, as you're indicating, primarily first generation.
Yeah, well,
in terms ethnically, gender,
right. Well, I think in some
parts of the country and stuff like that.
Okay, this is my view of it. When I came to FIT, we had a large contingent of what I call lower middle class Jewish students, and sprinklings of everything, with a growing lower middle class Italian population, and lots of commuting. Now, commuting from the suburbs, not inner city necessarily, commuting from the near suburbs, but we didn't have many dorms.
Suburbs means Long Island,
New Jersey, Connecticut, Yonkers. We got a lot of students from Westchester. As the dorms grew, we really began to have more of a national presence. I really think that, and we really do have students, as you well know now, from across the country. Now, some states send us more students than others, but the school, word of mouth, publicity that we've had, and the fact that we had dorms, decent dorms with a decent meal plan so that parents could really feel that their students were having the college experience, I think that brought in students from across the country. So that, now we can,
Began when? Do you know
well,
when
the
dorms-
the dorms start, the first dorms I think were, the first dorm, Nadler Hall it was called, maybe that was his name, no, it wasn't, but he was one of them, that guy Nadler from the dorm, I think that was from the early 60s, so we had a dorm from the early 60s on, and then we added these other dorms so that now we have much more room. We added these other dorms in the early 70s. We also had students sleeping in Keel Towers on 7th Avenue, which is a kind of an office building that was refurbished to house some students. So the really living on campus, distant visitor to the campus became a presence, so that we had big dorms. It helped us with student government. It helped us because when students live on campus, they are more likely to get involved in these extracurricular activities things. So we began to have elections and more clubs and more flea markets and all the kinds of things that students who are here for the 24-hour period could really participate in. I also think we had some foreign students whose parents were in the apparel industry over there who were sending their students here to go to school. That's an unusual thing. We had people from South Africa and people from Belgium and people from all over the country whose parents were in the apparel industry in Europe or in Africa or in Asia and sending their students here. So they're kids. So it's funny, we got industry leaders' kids here, but it was industry leaders from other countries. We didn't get the industry leaders' kids here in the numbers we thought we would have them, because maybe those industry leaders' kids wanted to be dentists or something, I don't know. But they didn't come to FIT in the big numbers that I thought they would, though you always have a certain percentage who say, my father's in the industry, my mother's in the industry, and that's why I'm here. But we didn't get the huge numbers of those. That was surprising to me, though we got them from other countries. As I look
It's still true.
It's still true. As I look at the students now, and I'm sure there's some documentation, we are becoming, thank goodness, more accessible to Hispanic students, to Afro-American students. We have a lot of Greek American kids because their parents are in the fur industry. Even if they're not going into the fur industry, they've visited the FIT neighborhood a lot. A lot of the Greek American kids are coming in. We have a large contingent now of Italian American kids, large contingent. The Jewish middle class, Jewish lower middle class kids are here in smaller numbers than they were when I started. But you still get a sprinkling, and the Russians are coming. The Russian Jewish kids are coming in. All of us have them in our classes, so we know that. You just see it, they talk. We have lots and lots and lots and lots of Asian kids now.
What countries would you say?
Oh, well, it's clear that it's Korea, both Koreas, but we have mainland China, we have Taiwan, we have students from Hong Kong, but a lot of Korean kids. We have Japanese American kids too. I have Japanese American kids in my class, and always a sprinkling from the unusual Asian countries, we got one or two Cambodians, one or two Vietnamese, one or two, but but the big push, my view is the big push, you probably would know far better than I, is that we have a lot of Korean American students. Some of them are not here a long time. Their English is really limited, but they are doing beautifully overall, not only moving right into our classes and moving right into our programs, but moving right into the industry. Doing very nicely. The Hispanic kids, the number of Hispanic kids is increasing, and I think not only kids whose background's Puerto Rican, but we have Dominican kids, and starting to get some Mexican. New York City in general doesn't have what they call in California Chicanos as much. We don't have Mexican American kids as much. But we do always have a few. In every entering class, we always have a few whose parents are here from Mexico. Basically speaking, our day school still has more young students who are out of high school a year or two than other community colleges. I belong to this faculty council of community colleges. I go as FIT's delegate twice a year to a meeting of all the community colleges in the state. It's a fascinating meeting. I enjoy it very much. And they have more adult students in their day school than we do. However, most of them do not have the night school we have. We have this huge continuing ed thing. And in our continuing ed school, you see enormous numbers of adults returning to either be retrained or to get their degree in the first place, to improve their job, to just get a degree, to learn whatever. And their day school in some of these community colleges upstate is like our evening school in terms of breakdown. They have daycare centers for their students who have children. We tried to start that here at FIT, and we weren't very successful. Most of the young students who live in the dorm don't have children that they would want in a daycare center, and the commuting students who had children, and there weren't a lot of them for the day school, were leaving their students at daycare centers or nursery schools where they live. They didn't want to come to FIT and put their students there. And the faculty and the staff, the same thing. We had a few who said yes, they would avail themselves of the service. But Erie Community College, for example, all of them, Orange County, they all have daycare centers right there, and they have older students in their day school. It may be the nature of the majors. It may be because they do pre-nursing and they do but I don't think that's it. I think FIT has just continued to draw students in the day school who are the typical post-high school student, young. We have exceptions. All of us teach adults in our classes, but not huge numbers of them. In the night school, that's pretty much what you have.
Now, when did the continuing ed or night school start?
Early. It started early, but it boomed in the bloomed or boomed, or whichever word you would use, in the late 60s and early 70s. It started early on, though. We had some night school classes. I don't know about the 40s and the early 50s. But I know that by the time I got here in 1960, the night school had started. A man by the name of Wagner was at the head of it, and actually one of our majors was a major only in night school. Pattern making was a major where you could only take it in continuing ed. We brought it into the day school in the late 60s under Jack Rittenberg. We brought it into the day school. You couldn't even major so we've had some interesting
Those
switch
were
around.
mostly people who worked as pattern makers.
That's right. And came
Is
into
that true of the other fields too, that working in the industry? It's very clear in pattern making.
Right. Well, I think
night
that
school.
in the night school students in the early days, many of them were working in the field, and it's even true now. Some of these students who are coming back to get these degrees are students who are vaguely in the field, one field or another, at night.
Okay, could you talk a little about your program, that you're the tech program? Explain
sure.
it, because that also brings in groups of students.
Yes, the Tech Prep program is a program that it is being run with funds from a grant that is it's federal money. It's the Cauley-Perkins, what we call VITEA funding source, but the federal government gives the money to the states, and the states give it out. So when you apply for a grant, you apply for a grant to the state ed department, and the state ed department on a competitive basis gives this particular program out. That is not true for all Cauley-Perkins money, but it's true for this Tech Prep money. This Tech Prep money is given to states, and states decide how to give it out, and the New York State Ed Department decided to give it out in competitive grants. There are 30 Tech Prep programs spread throughout the state, but there are only 5 in New York City. and we are one of them. We are the fiscal agent. FIT is the fiscal agent. I am the project director, and Cynthia Wellens and Nina Curtis, who's the dean of the Business and Technology Division, are the two people who helped us secure the grant. So Cynthia, Nina, and I were instrumental in getting it, and then I became the project director. And it's a well-funded program, and basically the idea is to work with 11th and 12th grade high school students who are in the middle of their class. You're not supposed to take the very poorly prepared, the lower 25%, who they think would need remedial work, and there are different programs and different funds for those kinds of students. You're not supposed to take the top 25%, who they feel will probably go to the universities in one way or another on their own. But you're supposed to take the middle group, the middle two quartiles, technically, the middle 50%, and adjust their curriculum a little bit, and adjust the way the classes are taught a little bit, so that you can ensure, or at least be more likely to ensure, that they would want to go to a technical college, and that they would do well if they got there. And we have been working with 3 high schools in Manhattan, High School of Fashion Industries, Murray Bertram, and Cydia School, and we're making preliminary connections with other schools, because we're starting to spread out now. We've been working with 11th and 12th graders, and we think the program is extremely successful. We have teams of faculty from FIT and from the high schools working together. There are some stipends involved. They are minimal, but nevertheless motivating, the stipends. So the stipends are given to faculty members to do work over and above their regular work, and they work together to create courses that infuse some industry stuff into the high school liberal arts classes, and infuse some liberal arts stuff into some vocational courses. We're trying to do both, but mainly what we've done is we've adjusted. The most wonderful English team has been working. Joan Stern and 2 high school teachers, Veronica Byrne and Barbara Cortez, have been working together, and they've created an 11th grade English class and a 12th grade English class that are absolutely phenomenal, with all the regular stuff that you want 11th graders to learn in high school English, but with it, a real experiential, project-oriented way of learning, so that students take responsibility for their own learning. They care about business ethics. They are concerned about deadlines. They worry about communicating effectively. They learn how to listen. They learn how to work in groups. They learn how to report out. They get involved in the stuff that probably they would need to be effective workers in the workplace. And yet they read all the regular English stuff. They're reading the Scarlet Letter. They're reading all the Shakespeare. They're doing, but they are taking this. They're taking their English, both their 11th and 12th grade English, and they are infusing into it stuff that authenticates school as a workplace. They really see school as a workplace. It's wonderful. They're involved with their own bulletin boards. They're doing portfolios. They're putting out a newspaper. It's amazing. So that's one thing. And the math, we've changed the math a little bit. The math is better, I think. Better, more interesting, more hands-on, more project-oriented, and the kind of math that will really help them in the programs that we're hoping they come into FIT for, or any other similar college. We also have a 12th grade course that we've introduced that introduces them to the fields that we're hoping they'll be interested in, which are textile development and marketing, FBM, fashion buying and merchandising, and manufacturing management. Those are the 3. And we're adding the business side of advertising, which is advertising communications, and pattern making. We're adding those, but we're just starting to do that now. And we have some wonderful field trips, and we have visits here, and we have a wonderful guru, which is a computerized self-assessment career guidance system that each one of them go through, and we have summer jobs that we get for them between the 11th and 12th grade. So it's a wonderful grant. But it's very successful. We've really become the prototype for the state in some ways. But it's been lavish learning to some extent, because we've only been working with 64 11th graders in each high school and 30 12th graders now. I mean, so these are not huge numbers, and whether we'll be able to replicate this grant and get schools to institutionalize it and take some of the stuff that it's very hard. You know, I don't have to tell you, there's this sort of lighthouse effect, or whatever you call that effect, that almost we wonder whether it's all the attention they're getting and the work that's going into this that's doing it, or whether it's the program itself. Maybe we could come in there and we could have done the exact opposite, but just made them feel special. And that's what it's called. Whatever it's called.
The lighthouse effect is good too.
Hawthorne effect, right. So we'll have to see, right.
Could you talk a little about FIT's connectedness to the Board of Education?
Sure.
New York City Board of Education.
Yes, every community college in the state is set up in the following way. The state is supposed to give, through the legislature actually, they fund you at a full-time equivalent rate. You average out how many full-time equivalent students you have. So you take your full-time students, and then you take your part-time students, and you figure out how many of them you need to make a full-time equivalent. You take all those students, and the state gives you a certain amount of money. It's about $1,800 a student. And then every community college is supposed to get about a third of its money from tuition, and every community college is supposed to have a local sponsor that contributes the other third. Now, the local sponsors are not contributing the third. That's the problem. In most cases, the local sponsor is a county. Orange County Community College, Orange County is supposed to be the local sponsor. Tompkins, Cortland, the counties of Tompkins and the counties of Portland are supposed to be contributing. Corning, Suffolk, the county of Suffolk. For FIT, the local sponsor is supposed to be the New York City Board of Ed. That is our local sponsor. They are supposed to be giving us approximately a third of our money. They aren't giving us that much, but they are giving us more than some other local sponsors are giving their schools. And that is our official connectedness to them. That is how we are attached. And there's no doubt about it, unfortunately, as these hard times prevail, when the New York City Board of Ed gets a cut, we get a cut. And we have been cut recently, and it really is a shame, because I think there's no doubt that FIT, in addition to being a successful educational institution, we really aren't being phony. We are not padding the truth when we say we contribute to the economy, because our students do go out, they do work, they do get jobs, they do pay taxes, and they by and large stay in New York State. Now, of course, some of them don't. The ones that don't go back to where they are, and I don't think that's terrible either. I mean, this kind of extreme chauvinism is, but if one is looking at it as an economic reality, the vast majority stay in New York State, and they get jobs and they pay taxes. So you certainly, so it really is foolish economically to cut us to the point where we can't fulfill our mission. But right now we're starting to be hurt. We're not in desperate shape, but we are starting to be hurt.
Do we have like famous alumni that contribute to our school?
Yes, but I would say that basically we need to improve in that area. The public sector colleges, it's not just FIT. Public sector colleges never became sophisticated about fundraising the way the private sector. My husband graduated after that veterans college that I made reference to. He ended up going to Wharton, and so he gets all the stuff from the University of Pennsylvania, and I watch what they do. My daughter went to Brown. I watch what they do. I can't get over how they fundraise and how good they are at it and how supportive the alumni are. We have the beginnings of a good operation, but we've really been slow. We've been less sophisticated about it. we haven't tapped them, our alumni, famous or not famous. Many of them are successful. We haven't tapped them the way we should have, and we are starting to now. This last dinner dance, Richard Strider said, earned over $1 million. That kind of thing will begin to have an effect. But we've been late, or we've been slow, or whatever the phrase would be. But we have very famous alumni. I think you probably know that. Well, Calvin Klein and Norma Kamali and Stephen Smith, and we have enormously famous alumni who are the leaders of our industry. Dawn Mello, who's the head of Bergdorf's, and even on and on and on and on. I can hardly name them, but it might be worthwhile for you as you're doing this oral history, just to get someone to really talk to you, almost read a list of the famous alumni so you have it on tape, because it's probably incomparable in these fields. Because you see, even though we have competitors, Parsons and Pratt and SVA have some of the same majors we have, they aren't as big as we are, and they don't have all the same majors we have. So when you talk about our alumni, we are for the fashion and related industries, we are where City College was 40 years ago. Everybody seems to have gone to City College and then got a bachelor and then got their doctorate somewhere else. That's FIT is like that for our industries. Almost many people went to FIT who are now successful in some aspect of the fashion industry.
Okay.
Thank you, Karen.
Wait,
Oh.
that's Is there something that you'd like to say further about some reminiscences that you'd like to be on tape, in the archives, things you can remember, some funny situations said or particularly striking situations? Could be union, FIT
Right.
generally.
Well, actually, I do have one very cute little story that I always tell. The union, it's very minor, but it's a cute story. When we have, I think I tried to give the impression that the union, by and large, has had decent relationships with the administration, and I think very good relationships with its own members, certainly. But there were moments when we were in conflict, and there was one particular time in the 70s when we were in very, very rough contract negotiations and they weren't going well. And we decided that we were going to organize first informational picketing as a prelude to a possibility of a job action. We didn't know. And I somehow had that job. My job was to get the picket signs given out and the shifts staffed by people who would march around with these picket signs. So I brought my car down, and with all the picket signs in them and with all the stuff. Now I happen to drive a Mercedes, so it's an old one, but in those days it wasn't as old as it is now, and so it was new in those days, and it was quite. And President Feldman used to talk all the time about, only in my school does the picket organizer, the strike leader, drive a Mercedes. So he would tell us, we even have union leaders who drive a Mercedes. That's what FIT is like. He always used to tell that story. So that's one very cute story. The other story that I always tell was it was quoted in the Christian Science Monitor not too long ago, and this is an absolute true story. It's typical of FIT and typical of the way I think the liberal arts people have to know that we're not at Wesleyan quite. We're not. It's okay. It's where we are is wonderful, but it's not Wesleyan Middlebury. It's not Middlebury. I was teaching my biology class and talking the way you can see I can, on and on and on. And at the end of the class, I noticed that I always notice, as all teachers do, some students aren't paying a lot of attention, some are a little sleepy, whatever. a student came up to me and she said, Mrs. Parkas, I'm sorry I wasn't paying attention, but these scarves are due at Bergdorf's in 20 minutes. But it wasn't Bergdorf's, it was Bendel's. These scarves are due at Bendel's in 20 minutes. She was sewing these hand-rolled silk things. She had these beautiful, they look beautiful to me, that's for sure, kind of like tie-dye silk stuff. And they were due at Bendel's in 20 minutes, so she certainly was trying to listen to my biology, but mainly she was sewing these scarves. You know, it was adorable. And I was thinking, that's the kind of stuff we have at FIT. So before we wind up, I just wanted to say, and this is kind of corny but true, that I do think part of the reason that the union at FIT has been so successful, but part of the reason that other things at FIT have been successful, is because the people who got together to do it felt an affiliation with each other as well as the institutions. My feeling is that every once in a while you meet people who can do stuff on their own. They just go off and they do stuff on their own. But basically, most endeavors are teamwork. And if you feel part of the team and you like being part of that team, and there is a team that is functioning effectively, you're more likely to be successful and get stuff done. And I think that with the FIT union, that's really been true. Lou and I and those other people I referred to over the years, we had Joe Garofalo and Judy Wood and Juliet, and we have a big team that's working, Arthur Levinson, and there have been other people who have since retired, but they were part of it. Lou and I have been there throughout, but there have been other people that's been a team that's really worked well. And of course George Levinson, who died and who we always talk about with this, you know, tremendous fondness. More than fondness, we really miss him terribly. But that's been a team. I also think that FIT as a college has been a team that many of us have been proud to be part of, and it's part of the reason that it worked so well. I hope that continues. Right now I'm not as convinced as I have been in the past that this team feeling and this family feeling will continue. I hope it will, and if it does, I think FIT will continue to be successful. If it doesn't, we're going to have to watch and see. And so those are the things I wanted to say. And I think that's...
Just a question, because you mentioned it, about have you been involved in political activity outside the school that's, you know, supported some effort here? Have you run for political office?
No, I haven't run for political office, but I was active at one of our... I have been active for the union in Albany and here in the city for about 15 or 20 years. I've gone to Albany and lobbied. I know the state legislators now. I'm part of our state affiliates committee of 100 where we lobby. So I've been active politically for the union for many years. In addition, one of our former deans, who was a vice president when she left, Janice Weinman-Shorenstein, ran for city council. And I was active on her campaign. My husband ran her campaign. So that certainly was a big involvement. She did not win. Ronnie Eldridge, who's been in the newspapers lately, is not getting along with Vallone, who's the city council president, won that seat. Janice came in second. It was a 6-person race. So she did very well, but she didn't win. Ronnie Eldridge's husband is Jimmy Breslin, who's the political columnist at New York Newsday. So she had a real good campaign that she put together. Our campaign was good too. So that, and then lately, I've been very active on the Upper West Side in politics because my husband is a district leader. He's a Democratic district leader. So I'm active in a wide variety of ways, and I think that this political activity has helped FIT. Not only I'm not the only one active, but I may be in some ways the most. We certainly, Lou is active too. We certainly helped get the bachelor's degrees programs through. We have been, in addition to getting our contracts through and doing stuff for our union, I think our political activity has helped FIT in general. We have done a little bit less partisan political activity at FIT, meaning get the vote out for the Democrats, than, let's say, the K through 12 locals have done over the years. Because college faculty have notoriously been reluctant to let their political leaders on campus tell them who to vote for. They are very reluctant, but we are getting there. We're getting a better operation out now by convincing our members that one party probably would be better for public higher education than the other party, and we're starting to, with exceptions, there are always exceptions, but we're starting to get a better vote fund coming out of this, out of FIT's faculty and staff. We're starting to collect more money. We're starting to be able to be more active politically, but colleges are slow. If you're a union activist, you're better off K through 12 than in college, though we're getting there. I think FIT's is one of the good ones.
Okay, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I want to thank you for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
It's our pleasure. Really.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark.
It was awesome.
Oh.
The expression says, I'm telling you, your wealth of information is fascinating, Judy. It was fascinating.
Thank you.
Really.